When he turned 18, the stepmother who never wanted him finally had the legal grounds to kick him out. She told him he'd inherited a worthless, dilapidated saddlery in the middle of nowhere. What he found inside wasn't just his grandfather's secret, it was his own salvation. And if you've ever felt lost, or like you've been handed a burden you didn't ask for, then stick around, because this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. The key was cold. It was the only thing in my pocket that felt real. Everything else was a blur of worn-out denim and the thin fabric of a backpack that held all I had left. 2 changes of clothes, a dog-eared paperback, and a phone with a cracked screen and 17% battery. The key was old, iron, and ornate in a way things aren't anymore. It felt heavy, like it was made of more than just metal. It was made of obligation. My 18th birthday present from the world was a bus ticket and an eviction. Denise, my stepmother, had been counting the days. I think she had a calendar in the kitchen where she crossed them off, each red X a little victory march toward her own freedom. My father had married her 3 years after my mom died, and for a while, it was fine. We weren't a family, not really, but we were a functioning household. Then my dad got sick, and the year he was dying was the year the polite fiction of our family crumbled. After he was gone, it was just me and her and the ghost of him in a house that felt too big and too quiet. She wasn't cruel, not in the storybook way. There were no locked doors or withheld meals. Her cruelty was quieter, a kind of weaponized indifference. It was in the way she'd look through me when I spoke, the way my presence was a sigh, an inconvenience, an unwelcome piece of furniture left behind by a previous tenant. The day my grandfather Arthur died was the day my last anchor was cut. He'd been my rock after my mom passed, but after my dad remarried, I saw him less and less. Denise made it difficult. He lived 4 hours away in a small town called Oakhaven, and every planned visit was somehow sabotaged. A sudden family thing for her relatives, a feigned illness, a car that was mysteriously acting up. After a while, the calls became less frequent too. I thought he was forgetting me. I thought he was moving on. It was the great, secret hurt of my teenage years, a quiet, festering wound that I never spoke about. When he died, the lawyer called the house. Denise took the call. She told me later, her voice flat, devoid of sympathy. "Your grandfather passed away. The funeral was yesterday. They tried to reach you. They hadn't. She'd just not given me the phone. She said I had inherited his old business. A dusty, falling down saddlery, she'd called it, her lips curled in a faint sneer. Probably owes more in taxes than it's worth. But it's yours now. You're an adult." And that was that. On the morning of my 18th birthday, my bags were packed and waiting by the door. She didn't do it herself. She just left them there, a silent, unassailable statement. I walked into the kitchen, and she was sitting at the table, sipping coffee, scrolling on her phone. She didn't look up. "There's an envelope on the counter," she said. Inside was $500 in cash, the iron key, and a one-way bus ticket. The name of the town was printed on it. Oakhaven. "That's more than fair," she'd added, her eyes still glued to the screen. "It's a clean break for both of us." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I picked up the envelope, turned around, and walked out the door without looking back. I left the ghost of my father there with her. Maybe they could finally have the house to themselves. The bus smelled of disinfectant and despair. I sat by a window smeared with the grime of 1,000 miles and watched the city dissolve into suburbs, then into the long, hypnotic green of the countryside. Each mile felt like a year being stripped away. I was going backward in time, toward a man I only half remembered and a place I'd never seen. I clutched the key in my pocket. A worthless saddlery. Was this his final, cruel joke? The grandfather who had taught me how to skip stones and identify constellations, who smelled of leather and sawdust and peppermint, had he really abandoned me twice? First in life, and now in death, with this useless, burdensome inheritance? The questions churned in my stomach, a sick cocktail of grief and anger. For 2 years, I had mourned him, but I had also resented him. Now, I was being sent to the scene of his final betrayal. The bus rattled on, and I leaned my head against the cool glass, the vibration a miserable hum that matched the one in my own head. What was I going to do? Arrive in a strange town with a key to a derelict building and $500 that had to last me, how long? Forever? The thought was so vast and terrifying it had no edges. I felt like a tiny astronaut cut loose from his ship, spinning slowly into an infinite, uncaring darkness. My phone buzzed, a low-life warning. 10%. I'd have to turn it off soon, save it for when I arrived. Save it for what? Who would I even call? There was no one. That was the simple, brutal truth of it. The bus driver's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a 10-minute rest stop. I didn't move. I just watched the other passengers shuffle off toward the sad little convenience store, their lives temporarily on pause. They all had somewhere to be, someone waiting. I was just going. I pulled the key out again. It had a small, tarnished brass tag attached to it. On it, etched in a looping, elegant script, were the words, A. Grafton and Son, Saddlery. Grafton was his name, Arthur Grafton. The and son must have been my father. A business meant for a future that never happened. A future that died with him in that sterile hospital room. The weight of it all pressed down, the sheer, crushing tonnage of loss. I cried then, for the first time since I'd walked out of Denise's house. Silent, hot tears that tracked through the grime on my cheeks. I cried for my father. I cried for the grandfather I thought I'd lost long before he died. And I cried for the scared, stupid 18-year-old on a bus to nowhere, clutching a key to a past he didn't understand and a future he couldn't imagine. The bus pulled into Oakhaven just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the underside of the clouds in bruised shades of purple and orange. The town was smaller than I'd imagined, a single main street lined with brick buildings from another century, a hardware store with a faded Coca-Cola sign, a diner with neon letters flickering in the dusk, a sleepy-looking movie theater with a marquee that was missing half its letters. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. I shouldered my backpack, the straps digging into my skin, and stepped off the bus. The air was different here. It was crisp and smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, a clean, sharp scent that was the complete opposite of the city's perpetual exhaust fume haze. For a moment, I just stood there on the sidewalk, a solitary figure in a town that seemed to be holding its breath. A pickup truck rumbled past. The driver, an old man in a flannel shirt, gave me a slow, curious nod. I nodded back, feeling like an imposter. I pulled out the envelope Denise had given me. The address was written below the business name, 14 Chestnut Street. I looked at the street signs. I was on Main. I asked a woman arranging flowers in a window box where Chestnut was. She pointed a dirt-smudged finger.
Just 2 blocks down, then a left. Can't miss it. It's the old Grafton place.
The way she said it, the old Grafton place, made it sound like a local legend or a local tragedy. I thanked her and started walking. The pavement was cracked, with weeds pushing their way through. The whole town had an air of gentle, dignified decay. It wasn't sad, exactly. It was just settled. It had been what it was for a long time and had no intention of becoming anything else. Then I saw it. It was at the end of the street, where Chestnut met the edge of a dense wood. It was larger than I expected, a two-story brick building that stood apart from the neighboring houses. The ground floor was all dark wood and glass, a wide storefront window so clouded with dust you couldn't see inside. Above the door, a heavy wooden sign swung on rusty chains, creaking softly in the evening breeze. The painted letters were faded and peeling, but I could still make them out. A. Grafton and Son. Saddlery. Denise was right. It was falling down. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse. Bricks were missing from the chimney, and the window frames were rotting. A thick layer of amber pine needles covered the front steps. It looked like it had been abandoned for a decade, not just 2 years. My heart sank. This wasn't a home. It was a tomb. For a second, I thought about turning around, walking back to the bus station and using that $500 to go anywhere else. Just pick a name on the board and go. But where? The key was still in my hand, and it felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. This was it. This was all I had. Taking a deep breath that tasted of dust and regret, I walked up the 3 creaking wooden steps. The lock was an ancient, heavy-looking thing, black with age. I slid the iron key into the keyhole. It felt like I was breaking into a pharaoh's tomb. The key resisted, stiff from disuse. I had to put my shoulder into it, gritting my teeth as I turned. There was a loud, groaning clunk from deep within the mechanism, a sound of protest from a long, slumbering machine. The door swung inward on its own, opening into a square of profound darkness. A smell rolled out to meet me, thick and complex and overwhelming. It was the smell of old leather, wood shavings, linseed oil, metal, and dust. The smell of my grandfather. I stood there on the threshold, hesitating. The sun had almost completely set, and the interior of the shop was a cave of shadows. My phone was my only light. I switched it on, the screen flaring to life, and pointed it inside. The beam cut a weak, trembling path through the gloom. The shop was frozen in time. A long, heavy workbench ran the length of one wall, its surface littered with tools, awls, cutters, mallets, punches, all coated in a fine, uniform layer of dust, like artifacts under a gray shroud. Half-finished projects lay scattered about. A saddle on a wooden horse, its leather pale and unstained. Coils of strapping hanging from hooks on the wall. A bridle in pieces, waiting for a stitch that would never come. It looked like he had just walked out in the middle of a sentence and never returned. It was eerie. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint creak of the sign outside. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on something. I pointed my light down. The floor was covered in a carpet of dried leaves and old mail that had been pushed through the slot in the door. Bills, junk mail, local papers. A 2-year time capsule of neglect. I walked deeper into the shop, the beam of my phone dancing over the walls. I saw framed photographs, their glass so dirty I couldn't make out the faces. I saw ribbons, blue ribbons, red ribbons, pinned to a corkboard, faded and curling at the edges. Champion. Best in show. My grandfather had been good at this. Really good. This place, this forgotten, derelict shop, hadn't always been this way. It had been alive once. It had been important. At the back of the shop, past a curtain of hanging leather hides that felt like the skin of sleeping animals, I found a narrow, steep staircase. It had to lead to the living quarters. My phone battery flashed a final, desperate warning. 5%. I had to find a light switch, a lamp, anything. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my hand trailing along a dusty, splintered banister. The air grew warmer, stuffier. The apartment upstairs was small, a combined living room and kitchen, a tiny bathroom, and a single bedroom. It was as frozen as the shop below, but in a more personal, more intimate way. A book lay open on a worn armchair, its pages warped by humidity. A coffee cup sat on the kitchen counter, a dark, fossilized ring at the bottom. In the bedroom, the bed was unmade, the blankets thrown back as if he'd just gotten up. This was where he had lived his last day. This was where he had breathed his last breath. The thought sent a cold shiver through me. I felt like a trespasser, a ghost haunting another ghost's home. My phone died. The screen flickered and went black, plunging me into absolute darkness. I stood paralyzed in the center of the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. The blackness was total, thick and suffocating. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I fumbled in my pockets for a lighter I didn't have, my mind racing. I was trapped. I was alone in a dead man's house in the middle of the night. This was a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. I started to panic, a hot, prickly feeling spreading up my neck. I had to get out. I turned, stumbling back toward where I thought the stairs were, my hands outstretched, grasping at nothing. My fingers brushed against a wall, then a lampshade. A lamp. I followed the cord with my fingers down to the wall, fumbling for a switch. Nothing. I traced it along the baseboard, my heart pounding. Then my fingers found it, a switch on the cord itself. I flicked it. Nothing happened. Of course, the power was off. The whole building was dead. I sank down onto the floor, my back against a wall, and pulled my knees to my chest. The despair was a physical weight. I was tired, so deeply, profoundly tired. I was tired of being alone, tired of being scared, tired of carrying this grief that felt like a stone in my gut. I thought about Denise, in her clean, well-lit house, probably watching TV, my existence already a fading memory. I thought about my father and the gaping hole he'd left in the world. And I thought about Arthur Grafton, the man who had left me this dark, silent prison. I hated him in that moment. I hated him with a pure, hot intensity. I buried my face in my knees and just sat there in the dark, letting the silence and the smell of the old house swallow me whole. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, a pale, gray light was filtering through the grimy windows. Morning. I had survived the night. My body ached from sleeping on the floor, and a deep chill had settled into my bones. But the terror was gone, replaced by a dull, hollow ache. The apartment, in the weak morning light, looked even sadder. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, illuminating the neglect. I got to my feet and started to explore, not with any purpose, just moving to move. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge. It was empty, of course, and smelled sour. The cupboards held a few tins of beans, a bag of hardened rice, and a jar of instant coffee. On the small kitchen table, tucked under the salt shaker, was a piece of paper. A shopping list. Bread, milk, eggs, coffee. The last mundane thoughts of a man whose life was about to end. It made him feel real in a way the silent, dusty tools downstairs hadn't. He wasn't just a craftsman. He was a man who ran out of coffee. I moved into the living room. The armchair, the one with the open book, faced the largest window, which looked out over the woods behind the house. I picked up the book. It was a collection of poems by Robert Frost. A page was marked with a folded corner. I read the first few lines. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I didn't yet understand. Next to the chair was a small, sturdy-looking writing desk. It was the one piece of furniture that wasn't covered in a thick layer of dust. It was clean, as if it had been recently used. The top was bare except for a blotter and a pen tray. I tried the drawers. The top two were unlocked. They contained stationery, envelopes, stamps, a checkbook from a long-closed bank account. The bottom drawer, a deep, wide one, was locked. I jiggled the handle, but it was solid. There was no key in the other drawers. I ran my hands over the surface of the desk, along the sides, underneath. My fingers brushed against something taped to the underside of the drawer. A small, flat key. My breath caught. With trembling hands, I peeled the tape off and pulled the key free. It was small, a skeleton key for a piece of furniture. It fit the lock on the bottom drawer perfectly. I turned it, and with a soft click, the lock disengaged. I pulled the drawer open. It was full, and it wasn't full of papers. It was full of letters. Dozens of them, all in the same kind of cream-colored envelopes, all addressed to me. They were bundled together with a simple piece of twine. On top of the stack was a single, thicker envelope with my name, Leo, written on it in my grandfather's familiar, looping script. This was it. This was a beginning or an end. My hands shook as I untied the twine and lifted the top envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. I sat down in the dusty armchair, the one where he used to sit, and carefully broke the seal. The letter was dated 2 days before he died. The ink was a dark, confident blue. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally come home. I am sorry. Those are the first words I need to say to you. I am sorry for the silence of these past years. I am sorry if you felt abandoned. Nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is, I was trying to protect you. I had to stop and take a breath. My eyes were burning. I read on. After your father died, and things with Denise became difficult, I knew I couldn't have you here with me. Not yet. There were things I had to take care of, dangers you don't know about. A man from the city, a developer, wanted this land. Not just my little plot, but the whole edge of the woods. He was ruthless, Leo. He pressured people, threatened them, bought them out for pennies on the dollar. He tried it with me. When I said no, he started to play dirty. Accidents started happening. A fire in the shed out back. My truck's brake lines cut. The sheriff in this town is a good man, but he's in the developer's pocket. There was no help to be had. I couldn't bring you into that. I couldn't risk you. So I had to cut ties. I had to make it look like I didn't care. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, listening to your voice get smaller and smaller on the phone, knowing I was the cause of your pain. But I was buying you time. Your 18th birthday. That was the goal. The law is funny, Leo. As a minor, you were vulnerable. But as an adult, inheriting this property directly, you have rights they can't easily trample. This place is yours, free and clear. The deed is in your name, unencumbered. I made sure of that. My vision blurred. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been fighting for me. The entire time I had been hating him, he had been fighting a silent, lonely war on my behalf. The shame was a physical blow. Now for the hard part, the letter continued. This developer, a company called Sterling Pines Development, they won't give up. They'll come for you. They'll offer you money, probably a lot of it to a boy with nothing. It will be tempting to take it and run. I won't blame you if you do. But before you decide, you need to know what you'd be selling. This isn't just a building, Leo. It's a legacy. And it's a key. In the workshop, by the main cutting table, there's a loose floorboard. The third one in from the wall. Underneath it, you'll find everything you need to understand. Everything you need to make a choice. Not my choice, Leo. Your choice. Whatever you decide, know this. I have loved you every single day of your life. I have never been more proud of anyone than I am of you. You have a good heart, just like your father. Don't let the world harden it. Be brave. Your loving grandfather, Arthur. I folded the letter, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold it. A loose floorboard. A choice. I stood up, my legs feeling weak, and went back down the narrow stairs into the cold, dusty workshop. The morning light struggled to pierce the grimy windows, but it was enough to see by. I found the main cutting table, a massive slab of scarred oak that dominated the center of the room. I knelt on the cold concrete floor and counted the floorboards. 1, 2, 3. The third one looked no different from the others. I tried to pry it up with my fingernails, but they were wedged tight. I looked around the workbench and found a wide, flat-bladed tool, some kind of leather scraper. I wedged the edge into the seam and pushed. The wood groaned in protest. I put my weight into it, and with a sharp crack, the board splintered and came loose. I tossed it aside and peered into the darkness below. It was a small, brick-lined cavity, and inside there was a metal box. It was an old army surplus ammunition box, painted olive drab, with heavy latches on the front. It was heavy. I hooked my fingers under the handle and lifted it out. It took all my strength to drag it out onto the floor. I sat back on my heels, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. This was everything. I opened the latches. They were stiff, and the sound they made echoed in the silent workshop. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was money. Stacks of it. $100 bills, bundled in paper bands. It wasn't a fortune, not millions, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It must have been tens of thousands of dollars. My grandfather had been saving, hoarding cash, hiding it away from the banks where the developers' lawyers could track it. Beneath the money, there were more documents. One was the deed to the property, clean and crisp, with my name listed as the sole heir. Another was a thick file folder. I opened it. It was full of papers. Letters from lawyers representing Sterling Pines development, with escalating, aggressive offers. They were copies of police reports my grandfather had filed for the shed fire, the cut brake lines, all marked, case closed, no suspects. And then there were his own notes, meticulous, handwritten logs of harassment, dates, times, license plate numbers of unfamiliar cars parked outside, names of local people who had suddenly sold their land and left town. It was a dossier, a case file against Sterling Pines. He hadn't just been defending himself, he had been building a weapon. And at the bottom of the box, I found one last thing. A small, velvet-wrapped object. I unwrapped it. It was an old cassette tape, the kind I'd only seen in movies. A label on it, in his handwriting, said only, "For Leo, play this last." I had the truth, I had the money, but I had no way to play the tape. And suddenly, I was starving. The grief and shock had been replaced by a gnawing, desperate hunger. I counted out $200 from one of the stacks, tucked it into my pocket, and put the lid back on the box. I couldn't leave it out. I slid it back into the hole and replaced the broken floorboard as best I could. It looked conspicuous, but it would have to do for now. I locked the front door behind me and walked back toward the main street. The town was awake now. People were moving about, cars were driving past. It all felt strangely normal, a world moving on while mine had just been shattered and rebuilt. I found the diner I'd seen the night before. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. Every head turned. The stranger. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered a coffee, pancakes, bacon, eggs, everything. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, just nodded. "Rough night?" she asked gently. I just nodded, unable to speak. While I waited for my food, a man came in and sat at the counter. It was the man from the pickup truck the night before. He ordered a coffee and caught my eye in the mirror behind the counter. He nodded again. "You're Arthur's boy, aren't you?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "Grandson," I corrected, my own voice hoarse. "Leo," he grunted. "Heard you were coming. I'm Bill, run the hardware store." He took a sip of his coffee. "That place has been empty too long. Good to see a light on, even if it's just a metaphorical one for now." He knew the power was out. Of course he did. In a town this small, everyone knew everything. "Your granddad was a good man," Bill said, turning on his stool to face me. "Stubborn as a mule stuck in mud, but a good man." He stood up to those Sterling Pines vultures when no one else would. The food arrived, a mountain of it, and I ate like I hadn't seen food in a year. Bill watched me for a minute. "You need anything, you come see me. The power company will want a deposit to turn the lights back on. And a safety inspection most likely, place being empty so long. It's a racket. I can give you the name of an honest electrician. And if you need a cassette player, well, I've got a box of them in the back of my shop. No charge." He knew. He must have known Arthur was leaving me something. Or maybe he just knew Arthur. He finished his coffee, put a few dollars on the counter, and stood up. "Don't let them push you around, kid," he said, and then he was gone. It was in that moment, in that dusty diner, with a plate of half-eaten pancakes in front of me and the kindness of a stranger warming the air, that I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. It wasn't much. It was a tiny, fragile flame in a vast darkness, but it was there. My grandfather hadn't left me a ruin. He'd left me a fortress. He hadn't left me a burden. He'd left me a choice. And he hadn't left me alone. He'd left me in a town with people like Bill. I paid for my meal, leaving a huge tip for the kind waitress, and walked out into the sunlight, squinting. My path felt clearer now. First the power, then the tape. I went to the hardware store. It smelled of metal and oiled wood, a cousin to the smell of the saddlery. Bill was behind the counter. He gave me the electrician's number and then disappeared into the back, returning with a small, silver portable cassette player. "Take this one," he said. "Still works, might need batteries." I bought the batteries, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a pry bar. I felt a sense of purpose, a feeling so foreign it was almost dizzying. On my way back to the saddlery, my phone rang. I'd plugged it in at the diner. The screen showed an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Leo Grafton?" a slick professional voice asked. "Yes," I said. "My name is Mark Coleman. I'm a representative for Sterling Pines Development. I understand you've recently taken possession of the property at 14 Chestnut Street." My blood ran cold. They were already moving. "We're prepared to make you a very generous offer for the property," he continued, his voice smooth as oil. $250,000. We can have the paperwork drawn up today, money in your account by the end of the week. You can walk away, free and clear. Start a new life. $250,000. The number was staggering. It was more money than I could comprehend. It was a ticket to anywhere. It was the easy way out my grandfather had warned me about. And you know, there's a part of this story where I have to be honest with you and with myself. I was tempted. For a split second, I saw it all. A new city, an apartment that wasn't full of ghosts, a life where I didn't have to fight. If you've ever been truly desperate, you know that feeling. That siren song of the easy way out. It's a powerful thing. And if you're listening to this right now, and you're at a crossroads like that, where one path is easy and the other is hard, but feels right, I want you to know you're not alone. We all face those moments. The story isn't about never being tempted. It's about what you do when you are. If this is hitting a nerve, if you're finding a piece of your own story in mine, let me know in the comments. This community, this space, it's for people who've had to choose the hard road. Your story matters. Now, let's get back to it. I stood there on the sidewalk, the developer's voice a slick poison in my ear. I could feel the weight of my grandfather's letter in my pocket, the memory of Bill's kindness, the phantom taste of the diner coffee. "I'll have to think about it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Of course," Coleman said, though there was a new, hard edge to his tone. "But the offer is only on the table for 48 hours. The market changes quickly. Don't take too long." He hung up. The threat was clear. Take the deal or get nothing. I walked the rest of the way to the Saddlery in a daze. The number echoed in my head. $250,000. It could solve every problem I had. But my grandfather's words echoed louder. "This isn't just a building, Leo. It's a legacy. And it's a key." I unlocked the door and went back into the cool darkness of the shop. I didn't turn on the flashlight. I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust. I could smell the leather, the wood, the history. I could almost feel him there with me, a quiet, reassuring presence. I wasn't selling. The decision settled in my gut, solid and sure. This place was mine. I was going to fight for it. First, I called the electrician Bill had recommended. A friendly voice answered. He said he could be there in an hour to do the inspection. Then I took the cassette player and the tape and went upstairs to the apartment. I sat in my grandfather's armchair, the one that faced the woods, and put the batteries in. I slid the cassette into the player. My finger hovered over the play button for a long moment. I was afraid of what I would hear, afraid of the grief, the finality of his voice. But I had to know. I took a deep breath and pressed play. There was a click, a hiss of static, and then his voice. It was just as I remembered it, a low, gentle rumble, like stones turning over in a slow river. But it was strained, tired. "Leo," he said, and my name on his lips was enough to break me. I started crying again, but this time it was different. It wasn't for what I had lost, but for what I had found. "Leo, if you're hearing this, you found the box. And you got my first letter. I hope you're not too mad at your old granddad." There was a sound of him clearing his throat, a wet, ragged sound. He was sick when he recorded this. He must have known he didn't have long. "There's more you need to know. The money, that's for you to get started, to pay the taxes, to turn the lights on, to eat. Don't be a fool and starve on a pile of pride. I saved it for you. Use it. But the real inheritance isn't the money, and it's not even this building. It's in the file. That developer, Coleman, he's part of a bigger machine, a criminal one. I found out they're not just buying land. They're using a legal loophole to rezone it from protected woodland to commercial. And they're doing it by bribing a county commissioner. The man's name is Roberts. The files have proof, copies of bank transfers I got from a source inside the bank. A young woman who was scared but did the right thing. She's since moved away, but the proof is there. If you give that file to the state authorities, not the local ones, you can stop them. You can expose the whole rotten mess. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of his labored breathing. But if you do that, they'll come after you, Leo. They'll fight back, and it will get ugly. They have money and power. All you have is the truth. Sometimes that's not enough. That's why I gave you the other choice. The money they offer you, it's a lot. Enough to disappear and be safe. I'd understand if you took it. A part of me even hopes you do. I don't want this fight for you. I wanted to finish it myself, but I ran out of time. His voice cracked. Damn it. I ran out of time. He took a shaky breath. This place, this Saddlery, it was my father's before it was mine. He built it with his own 2 hands. He taught your dad here. I taught your dad here. We were supposed to teach you here. It's more than brick and wood, Leo. It's 100 years of us, of our family. It's a place to stand your ground, a place to make something real and honest in a world full of shortcuts and lies. That's the real inheritance. The chance to be a man who makes things, not a man who takes things. But it's a hard path. I can't choose it for you. All I can do is tell you that I'm proud of you. Whatever you do. I love you, son. More than you'll ever know. The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. I sat there for a long time, the cassette player silent in my lap. He had given me an out. He had given me his blessing to run. But in doing so, he had made it impossible. How could I take the money and run, knowing what he had sacrificed? Knowing he had died fighting this lonely battle. He hadn't just left me a building or some money. He had left me his honor. He had left me his fight. And I knew, with a certainty that was terrifying and exhilarating, that I had to see it through. The electrician arrived, a cheerful man named Dave, who looked like he'd been born with a roll of electrical tape in his hand. He walked through the building, whistling, pointing out the ancient knob and tube wiring. "This is a fire hazard waiting to happen, son," he said. "To get the power on, you'll need to rewire the whole main floor and the apartment. It's a big job." "How much?" I asked, my stomach tightening. He scribbled on a notepad. "For a job this size, probably 10,000. Maybe a little more, depending on what we find when we open the walls." $10,000. A week ago, that would have been an insurmountable fortune. Now it was just a number, a fraction of what was hidden under the floorboards. "Okay," I said, the word feeling powerful in my mouth. "When can you start?" Dave looked surprised. "Well, I'm booked for a few weeks, but Arthur was a friend. I can move some things around. Start Monday if you can get me a deposit." "I can get it to you this afternoon," I said. His eyebrows shot up. "All right then, Monday it is." He left and I was alone again. I went back to the hole in the floor and took out the cash for the deposit. It felt strange, using his secret money. But he'd told me to. It wasn't for hoarding, it was for living. It was for fighting back. My next call was to the number on the slick business card I'd found in the file, the one for the State Investigation Bureau. I asked for the agent my grandfather had noted down. A woman's voice, crisp and no nonsense, came on the line. "Agent Miller." I took a breath. "My name is Leo Grafton. My grandfather was Arthur Grafton. He was in contact with you about a land development company called Sterling Pines." There was a pause on the other end. "Yes," she said slowly. "I remember Mr. Grafton. We were very sorry to hear of his passing. He was a brave man." "He left me evidence," I said, my voice low. "Proof of bribery, bank records, everything." The line was silent for a beat. "Mr. Grafton, are you in a safe location?" "I'm at his workshop," I said. "Okay, don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone. I'm 2 hours away. I'm leaving now. Lock your doors. I'll be there as soon as I can." The 2 hours I waited for Agent Miller were the longest of my life. I paced the dusty floor of the workshop, the pry bar from the hardware store in my hand. Every creak of the old building, every car that drove down the street, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Were they watching the house? Did they know I'd refused to sell? I felt hunted. But underneath the fear, there was a hard, cold resolve. I was no longer a scared kid on a bus. I was Arthur Grafton's grandson. I was standing my ground. I used the time to really look at the place, not as a ruin, but as a project. I saw past the dust and the decay. I saw the solid bones of the building, the beautiful grain of the wooden workbench, the history etched into every scar and stain. I saw what it could be. A clean, bright workshop, the tools polished and sharp, the smell of new leather, a place where things were made, a home. When Agent Miller's unmarked sedan pulled up, I was ready. She was a tall, severe-looking woman with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. I let her in and showed her the box. She sat at my grandfather's kitchen table and went through the file, page by page, her expression unreadable. I made her a cup of the ancient instant coffee. It was terrible, but it was all I had. A subtle, dry observation of my own discomfort. a tiny moment of normalcy in a completely insane day. She didn't seem to notice. After nearly an hour of silence, she looked up. "This is it," she said, her voice quiet with intensity. "This is the missing piece. Your grandfather was right about all of it." She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something like compassion in her eyes. "You're in a dangerous position, Leo. These are not nice people. We can offer you protection, a safe house until we make the arrests." I shook my head. The idea of running, of hiding in another anonymous room, felt like a betrayal. "No," I said. "This is my home. I'm staying here." She studied my face for a long moment. "Like grandfather, like grandson," she murmured, a small smile touching her lips. "Stubborn. Okay, we'll have a patrol car keep a quiet eye on the place. But you be careful. Call me if you see anything, hear anything, feel anything. Anything at all." She packed the files into a secure briefcase. "You've done the right thing, Leo. Your grandfather would be incredibly proud." She left, and as I watched her car drive away, I felt the weight of the world lift just a little. The fight wasn't over, but I wasn't fighting it alone anymore. The next few days were a blur of activity. Dave the electrician and his crew descended on the Saddlery, and the old building was suddenly filled with the sounds of drilling, sawing, and cheerful cursing. They were tearing out the old, dangerous wiring, bringing the place back to life from the inside out. I used the time and the newfound energy to start my own work. I began with the apartment. I threw open the windows, letting the fresh, clean air chase out the stale smell of neglect. I washed the grime from the glass, and suddenly the rooms were flooded with light. I scrubbed the floors, wiped down the walls, cleaned the kitchen until it shone. It was hard, physical work, and it felt good. Every bit of dirt I removed felt like I was washing away the past 2 years of my own inertia and despair. I packed away my grandfather's personal things, his books, his clothes, the half-finished coffee cup, into a chest, treating them with a reverence I hadn't known I was capable of. This wasn't erasing him, it was honoring him, making a space for my own life alongside his memory. One afternoon, while I was hauling a bag of trash out to the curb, a car pulled up. A sleek, black town car. The passenger window glided down, and I saw him. Mark Coleman. He was older than his voice, with silver hair and a suit that probably cost more than my first car would. He smiled, but it didn't reach his cold, reptilian eyes. "Mr. Grafton," he said, "I was disappointed you didn't return my call." "I've been busy," I said, my hand tightening on the trash bag. "I see that," he said, glancing at the electrician's van. "Investing in a property you're about to sell? That's an interesting strategy." "Who said I was selling?" I asked. His smile vanished. "Let me be clear. Our offer of $250,000 was a courtesy, a gesture of goodwill. That offer is now off the table. My new offer is $50,000, and I suggest you take it. Because properties like this have a way of losing their value. Faulty wiring, foundation problems, fires." The threat was naked, undisguised. My heart hammered, but I thought of the tape. I thought of Agent Miller. I thought of the word stubborn. I looked him straight in the eye. "This property is not for sale," I said. "Not for 50,000, not for 5 million. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do, and you're parked in a no parking zone." For a second, I thought he was going to get out of the car. His face was a mask of fury, but then he just laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You're making a mistake, kid," he said, and the window slid up. The car pulled away, leaving me standing on the curb, my knuckles white, my whole body trembling with a mixture of terror and triumph. I had faced the monster, and I hadn't backed down. That night, The lights came on. Dave finished the main connections, and with a flick of a switch, the apartment was filled with a warm, steady glow. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I stood in the middle of the living room, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and I felt like I had conquered the world. The building was no longer a tomb. It was alive. It was mine. The next morning, I started on the workshop. This was a bigger job. 2 years of dust and neglect had settled on everything. I spent a week just cleaning. I swept the floors, washed the windows, and wiped down every single tool on the workbench. As I cleaned, I learned. I picked up the tools, felt their weight in my hand. I ran my fingers over the half-finished saddle, tracing the lines of the stitching. I read the names on the faded ribbons. Oak Haven County Fair, State Championship. This was a place of excellence, of mastery. I found old leatherworking manuals on a shelf and started reading them at night, upstairs in my clean, bright apartment. I learned about types of leather, about the purpose of each tool, about the geometry of a perfect saddle. I felt a connection to the work, to him. I was starting to understand. It wasn't just about making things, it was about making them well, about patience and precision and a respect for the materials. It was a philosophy, a way of life. A few weeks later, Agent Miller called. "Turn on the news," she said. I did. And there it was. A press conference. The State Attorney General announcing the arrests of County Commissioner Roberts and several executives from Sterling Pines Development, including Mark Coleman. The charges were bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. The news report mentioned an anonymous whistleblower whose evidence had been crucial to the case. My grandfather. And me. A wave of relief so profound it made my knees weak washed over me. It was over. We had won. He had won. The months that followed were a quiet revolution. With the threat gone, I could finally breathe. I could finally build. I used some of the money from the box to buy new supplies. Huge, beautiful sides of oak-tanned leather, spools of waxed thread, new buckles and hardware. The smell of the new leather mingled with the old, creating something new. I started small, practicing my stitching on scraps, making a simple belt, then a wallet. My first attempts were clumsy, the stitches uneven. But I kept at it, my grandfather's manuals open on the bench beside me. I could feel his guidance in the words, could almost hear his voice correcting my grip, telling me to be patient. I wasn't just learning a craft, I was in conversation with him. The town, which had been watching me from a distance, started to open up. Bill from the hardware store would stop by with coffee in the morning. The waitress from the diner, whose name I learned was Sarah, started bringing me leftovers. People would poke their heads in the open door of the workshop, curious. "Good to see this place fired up again," they'd say. "Your granddad would be proud." One day, an old farmer came in. He was holding a broken bridle. "Heard you were Arthur's grandson," he said. "Heard you were taking up the trade." This was the last thing he made for me. The stitching finally gave out after 20 years. "Think you can fix it?" I looked at the intricate weave of the leather, the complex repair it would need. It was beyond anything I had tried before. I was terrified of failing, of ruining this piece of my grandfather's legacy. But I looked at the farmer's hopeful, weathered face, and I thought of Arthur's words, "Be brave." "I can try," I said. It took me 3 days. I had to undo the old stitching, carefully, and replicate it exactly. My fingers ached, and I redid one section 4 times until it was perfect. When I was finished, it was strong. It was right. The farmer came back to pick it up. He ran his thumb over the new stitches, his expression thoughtful. "You've got the gift, son," he said quietly. "You've got his hands." He paid me, and I held the crumpled $20 bill in my hand. It was the first money I had ever earned. It felt like more than the entire box of cash under the floor. That was the beginning. Word spread. More people started coming by. An old saddle that needed relining, a custom dog collar, a sheath for a hunting knife. Each project was a new challenge, a new lesson. I wasn't my grandfather. I didn't have his decades of experience. But I had his tools, his books, and his name. And I had his stubbornness. I was building a business, but I was also building a life. I was becoming a part of the town, a part of its history. The Saddlery was no longer the old Grafton place. It was my place. One evening, I was sitting in the armchair upstairs, looking out at the woods, now safe and protected. The building was filled with the good smell of leather and wax, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I thought about the scared kid who had stepped off that bus with nothing but a key and a pocket full of resentment. He felt like a different person, someone I barely knew. My inheritance hadn't been a worthless building. It was a second chance. It was a knowledge that I was loved, that I was part of a story bigger than my own pain. It was a choice to stand for something, to build something, to be someone. Home isn't a place you're given, it's a place you make, and sometimes you have to tear it all down to the studs and rewire it before the lights can come on. The greatest inheritances aren't the ones that make your life easy. They're the ones that challenge you to become the person you were always meant to be. My grandfather gave me a key, not just to a building, but to myself. And for that, I will be forever grateful. This journey taught me that what looks like an ending is so often a beginning in disguise. It taught me that the things we inherit, the burdens, the legacies, the pain, the love, they don't define us, our choices do. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for listening. I share these stories because I believe in the power of reframing our past and choosing our future. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own inheritances, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to the channel and become part of this community. And please, in the comments below, tell me, what's a worthless thing you were given that turned out to be a treasure? I read every single comment because your stories, your choices, they matter. Thank you for being here. You're not alone in this fight.